I was thrown out of my own home in the middle of a freezing night, accused of being a thief by the very people whose lives I had spent years holding together. But here's the part that still keeps me awake sometimes if I didn't steal anything. Why did my entire family act like they had been waiting for this moment? My name is Meredith. I'm 25 years old, and until recently, I worked in logistics long hours, heavy lifting, the kind of job that leaves your body aching, but your mind too tired to question why you're doing it all in the first place. I used to tell myself it was worth it, that everything I was doing had a purpose, that I was building something stable, something safe, for my family. But that night, standing barefoot on frozen concrete while black trash bags full of my belongings were tossed at my feet like garbage, I realized something I had been too blind to see before. I was never part of that family. I was just the one paying for it. The sound of the door slamming shut behind me echoed louder than anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't just wood hitting a frame, it was final. Cold. Decisive. Like a line being drawn through my existence. "Don't come back," my father had said, his voice flat, almost bored. "We're done supporting a criminal." A criminal. The word still felt unreal in my ears, like it belonged to someone else's story. Someone reckless. Someone desperate. Not me. I didn't take anything, I had tried to say. My voice came out weak, shaking not just from the cold, but from the sheer disbelief of what was happening. "You know I didn't." But he didn't even hesitate. Behind him, my sister Jenna stood in the doorway. Arms crossed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against her sleeve. There was something in her expression that I couldn't unsee, something almost satisfied. "She hid it under her bed," Jenna snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the icy air. "I found it myself. What more proof do you need?" Proof. That word hit me harder than the cold wind biting through my thin pajamas. Because I hadn't just been accused, I had been set up. Minutes earlier, everything had spiraled so fast I could barely process it. I had been lying in bed, trying to ease the dull, constant pain in my back, when Jenna's scream shattered the silence downstairs. "My watch is gone." It wasn't just panic in her voice, it was theatrical. Loud, perfectly timed. Before I could even sit up properly, my bedroom door burst open so violently it slammed against the wall. My mother stood there, already breathing hard, her face set with a determination that didn't match confusion, it matched expectation. "Get up," she said. "We're checking your room." I remember staring at her, completely disoriented. "What? Why would you?" "Because your sister's watch didn't just grow legs and walk away," she cut in coldly. There was no room for questions, no room for defense. It was like I had already been found guilty before the trial even started. I tried to push myself up, wincing as pain shot through my spine. But she didn't wait. She moved straight past me, past my desk, past my closet, heading directly for my bed. That's when something inside me dropped. Because she didn't search. She went straight to where it was. With a sharp motion, she yanked the blankets off, grabbed the edge of the mattress, and flipped it up with surprising force. And there it was. A gold watch, gleaming under the dim light, placed so perfectly in the center of the frame that it almost looked staged. No, not almost. It was. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't. How did that even get there? I can't even. You can't even what? Jenna cut in, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing with mock disbelief. Walk properly? Oh, please, Meredith. Desperation makes people do crazy things. Her words dripped with something far more dangerous than anger. Control. I looked between them, my mother, my sister, and felt something shift deep inside my chest. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. "I didn't take it," I said again. But even I could hear it, the weakness in my voice, the way it sounded like a plea instead of a statement. My father appeared in the doorway then, his expression unreadable, his presence heavy enough to silence the room instantly. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask me anything at all. He just walked in, glanced once at the watch, and nodded slowly like everything had just been confirmed. "That's enough," he said. And just like that, it was over. No discussion, no doubt, no hesitation. Judgment passed. Sentence delivered. I watched, frozen, as he reached for my nightstand and picked up my phone. Then my keys. The small, ordinary things that connected me to the outside world gone in seconds. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Taking back what you owe us," he replied coldly. "You think you can steal from this family and still live under this roof?" The irony of that statement didn't even have time to settle before everything exploded into chaos. Black trash bags, drawers yanked open, clothes shoved inside without care. My mother moved with a kind of efficiency that made my stomach twist like she had been waiting for permission to do this. I tried to stop them, but every movement sent sharp waves of pain through my body. My back screamed in protest, my legs trembling under the strain. "Please, just listen to me," I begged. "You know I wouldn't." "Stop lying," Jenna shouted, her voice rising, almost triumphant now. "For once in your life, just admit what you did." For once, that phrase lingered longer than anything else. As if she had been waiting for me to fail. As if this wasn't about the watch at all. The next thing I knew, my father grabbed my arm too hard and dragged me toward the front door. I stumbled, nearly falling, the pain blurring my vision. And then, cold. Sharp, biting, unforgiving cold hit me all at once as I was shoved outside. The concrete beneath my feet felt like ice, stealing the warmth from my body instantly. I barely had time to react before the first trash bag hit the ground beside me with a heavy thud. Then another. And another. Each one felt like a statement. "You don't belong here. You never did." I looked up, desperate, searching for something, anything in their faces. Regret, doubt, humanity. But all I saw was a door closing. And behind the glass window, my mother stood there, watching. Not crying, not hesitating, just watching, like I was already gone. I sank down onto the freezing pavement, my body shaking uncontrollably now, not just from the cold but from the realization crashing over me all at once. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something far worse. They wanted me out. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. If you had seen my life just a year before that night, you would have thought I was the lucky one. I was the dependable daughter, the responsible one, the one who never caused trouble, never asked for anything, and always found a way to keep everything from falling apart. I used to take pride in that. I thought it meant I was strong, that I was loved. But looking back now, I realized something painful. I wasn't strong. I was convenient. In my early 20s, while most people were still figuring themselves out, I was already juggling 2 jobs just to keep my family afloat. During the day, I worked at a logistics warehouse, long shifts, heavy loads, constant pressure. At night, I took on a second job, anything that could bring in extra income. Sometimes it was remote admin work, sometimes late shifts at a small distribution office. It didn't matter. If it paid, I took it. Every paycheck I earned had a destination before it even reached my hands. Utility bills, mortgage payments, credit card debt. Especially Jenna's. My younger sister had always lived like the world owed her something. Expensive clothes, impulsive shopping sprees, dinners she couldn't afford but insisted on having anyway. At first, I told myself she was just young, just figuring things out. But the truth was, she never had to face consequences, because I was always there to clean up after her. I still remember the first time I paid off one of her credit cards. She had maxed it out on designer items, things she barely wore more than once. She cried when the bank called, panicking about interest rates and late fees. So I stepped in. "I'll handle it," I told her. And she didn't even hesitate to let me. That should have been my first warning. But instead, I convinced myself that this was what family meant. You help each other. You sacrifice. You show up when no one else will. And for a long time, I believed they saw me the same way. There were moments, small ones, that kept me going. My mother thanking me quietly when the lights stayed on. My father mentioning to relatives how reliable I was. Even Jenna, occasionally, would smile and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you." I held on to those words like they meant something real. Like they weren't just appreciation for a service. Because the truth is, No one ever asked me how I was doing. No one noticed the exhaustion that clung to me like a second skin, the way my hands would tremble after a double shift. The nights I fell asleep without eating, because I was too tired to even sit up. I told myself it didn't matter, that it would all be worth it eventually. That one day, if I ever needed help, they would be there for me the same way I had been there for them. That illusion shattered the moment I stopped being useful. It happened 5 months before the night I was thrown out. I was at the warehouse, near the end of a long shift. My body already felt like it was running on fumes, but I pushed through like I always did. There was a shipment delay, and everything was moving faster than it should have. People shouting, forklifts backing up, pallets stacked higher than they should have been. I remember looking up, just for a second. And then, everything went wrong. A heavy pallet shifted, unbalanced, and before I could react, it came crashing down directly onto me. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs instantly. Pain exploded through my back, sharp and blinding, like my entire body had been split in half. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream properly. All I could do was lie there, gasping, as the world blurred around me. The next few hours were a haze of sirens, hospital lights, and voices I couldn't fully process. Spinal injury, emergency surgery, long recovery. Words that didn't feel real at the time, but would come to define everything that followed. When I finally came home weeks later, everything had changed. At first, my parents played their roles well. They paid for my medication, drove me to physical therapy, asked me how I was feeling, but there was something off. Something in the way my mother sighed a little too loudly every time she wrote a check. The way my father avoided eye contact whenever the topic of bills came up. The silence at dinner, heavier than it had ever been before. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. "Do you know how much these treatments cost?" my mother muttered one evening, not even trying to lower her voice. "This isn't sustainable." I sat there, frozen, my appetite gone, guilt creeping in like a shadow I couldn't escape. "I didn't ask for this," I said quietly. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The message was clear. This was my fault. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in the house shifted from tense to hostile. My savings disappeared faster than I expected. Without an income, every expense felt heavier. Every dollar mattered. And they knew it. One afternoon, I gathered the courage to ask my father for help. Just $50. Enough to refill my pain medication. He didn't even look at me when I spoke. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crumpled bill, and tossed it onto the table like he was feeding a stray animal. "Make it last," he said. I stared at the money, my chest tightening, something inside me breaking in a way that felt permanent. That was the moment I understood. Everything I had given them meant nothing now. Family dinners became unbearable after that. Jenna, especially, seemed to enjoy the shift. She would lean back in her chair, scrolling through her phone, making comments just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Must be nice," she said one night, not even looking at me. "Just sitting around all day while the rest of us actually work." I felt the words hit harder than they should have. Because part of me still wanted to defend myself, to remind her of the years I spent paying for everything she had. But I stayed quiet. Because deep down, I already knew. She hadn't forgotten. She just didn't care. Another night, she went further. She looked straight at me across the table, her expression cold, almost bored. "You know what you are now?" she said. "A parasite." The word echoed in my head long after the conversation ended. I glanced at my parents, waiting, hoping for one of them to say something. To correct her, to defend me. But they didn't. My mother kept eating. My father said nothing. And in that silence, I heard everything I needed to hear. I started to make myself smaller after that, staying in my room, avoiding conversations, moving carefully, quietly, like if I took up less space, I might be less of a burden. The only person I could still talk to was Heidi, my best friend. She was the only one who listened without judgment, who got angry on my behalf when I couldn't find the strength to be angry myself. "This isn't normal, Meredith," she told me one night over the phone. "You need to get out of there." I hesitated. Because despite everything, a part of me still believed in them. "They're just stressed," I said weakly. It'll get better. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. Heidi went quiet for a moment before speaking again, her voice softer this time. Just promise me you'll be careful. I did. But the truth is, I had no idea what I should have been careful of. Because while I was trying to survive each day, trying to hold onto the last fragile pieces of hope I had left, they were already planning how to get rid of me. The strange thing about losing your place in a family isn't that it happens all at once. It doesn't. It happens slowly, in quiet moments, in the way people stop looking at you the same way they used to. Until one day, you realize you're no longer seen at all. After the accident, my world shrank to the size of my room. Days blurred together in a cycle of pain medication, physical therapy, and long stretches of silence. My body felt foreign to me, unreliable, fragile, nothing like the machine I had once pushed past its limits without question. Even the simplest movements became calculated efforts. Sitting up, standing, taking a few careful steps with support, everything hurt. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. It was the feeling of becoming unnecessary. At first, I tried to stay hopeful. I told myself this was temporary, that I just needed time to heal, and then I could go back to work, go back to being the version of myself everyone depended on, the version that had value. But recovery was slow, slower than I wanted, slower than they were willing to tolerate. I started noticing the changes in small ways. The way my mother stopped knocking before entering my room. The way she would stand there for a moment, looking around like she was assessing something, not me, but the space I occupied, as if she were calculating how much it cost to keep me there. Sometimes she would sigh, long and heavy, before speaking. You should try to do more, she said one afternoon, watching me struggle just to sit upright. Lying around all day isn't going to fix anything. I bit back the response that wanted to come out. That I was trying. That every movement felt like my spine was being pulled apart. Instead, I nodded. Because I had already learned that explaining myself didn't change anything. My father was worse in a different way. He didn't say much. He didn't yell or complain directly. He just withdrew. Conversations became one-sided, then non-existent. If I entered a room, he would find a reason to leave. If I spoke, he would respond with short, clipped answers, if at all. It was like I had become something he didn't want to deal with, something inconvenient. And then there was Jenna. At first, she pretended nothing had changed. She still spent money like she always had, still came and went as she pleased, still treated the house like it revolved around her. But slowly, her tone shifted. Subtle at first. A comment here, a glance there. "You're still not working?" she asked one morning, scrolling through her phone as I carefully lowered myself into a chair. "I'm recovering," I replied quietly. She hummed, unimpressed. "Must be nice." I didn't respond. But she didn't need me to. Because the point wasn't to have a conversation. It was to remind me of where I stood. Weeks passed, and the comments became sharper, less subtle, more intentional. One evening during dinner, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me like she was studying something unpleasant. "You know," she said casually, "some people would feel guilty living like this." The room went quiet. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my eyes on my plate. "I do feel guilty," I said softly. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Well, at least you're self-aware," she replied. I glanced up, just for a second, hoping again that someone would step in, that my parents would say something, anything. But my mother continued eating as if nothing had been said. And my father didn't even look up. That silence. It said more than words ever could. It told me that Jenna wasn't crossing a line. Because there was no line anymore. I started eating less after that. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because sitting at that table felt like walking into a place where I didn't belong. Every meal felt like a reminder that I was taking up space, consuming resources I no longer had the right to. So I stayed in my room more often. I kept the door closed. I made myself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. But no matter how small I tried to become, it wasn't enough. Because to them, I wasn't just a burden. I was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. The tension in the house grew heavier with each passing day. Conversations between my parents became more frequent, more hushed, stopping the moment I entered the room. Jenna spent more time whispering to my mother, their voices low but urgent, their glances toward me quick and calculating. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just being paranoid, that this was what stress looked like. But deep down, there was a quiet voice inside me that knew better. Something wasn't right. I just didn't want to see it yet. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because it seemed like such a small thing. I had run out of my pain medication. The dull ache in my back had started to sharpen again, creeping into every movement, every breath. I tried to push through it, but by the afternoon, it became unbearable. So I did something I hated doing. I asked for help. My father was sitting in the living room, watching television, his attention fixed on the screen. "Dad," I said, my voice hesitant, "I need to refill my prescription. It's about $50. He didn't respond immediately. For a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me. Then he seehed. A slow, irritated sound. He reached into his wallet without looking at me, pulled out a crumpled bill, and tossed it onto the coffee table. Not handed. Tossed. It slid across the surface, stopping just short of falling off the edge. "Make it last," he said. That was it. No concern, no question, no acknowledgement of the fact that I was in pain. Just annoyance. I stared at the bill for a long moment, something inside me cracking in a way that felt irreversible. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant. I wasn't his daughter in that moment. I was an expense, an inconvenience, something to be managed with the least amount of effort possible. I picked up the bill slowly, my fingers trembling, and whispered, "Thank you." But the words felt hollow, pointless, because gratitude didn't change the way he looked at me, or didn't look at me. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house around me. I thought about everything I had done for them, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar I had handed over without hesitation. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for months. If the roles were reversed, would they have done the same for me? The answer came faster than I expected. No. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. Because it meant that everything I had believed about us, about family, about loyalty, about love, had been built on something that was never real to begin with. I turned onto my side carefully, wincing as pain shot through my back, and pulled the blanket tighter around me. The house felt colder than usual that night. Not because of the temperature, but because, for the first time, I truly understood that I was completely alone. And while I was lying there, trying to hold myself together, trying to make sense of everything that had changed, they were already taking the next step. I just didn't know it yet. Looking back now, I can see how carefully everything was staged. Every word, every movement, every reaction, it wasn't chaos. It was a performance. And I was the only one who didn't know the script. It started early that Saturday morning. I hadn't slept well the night before. The pain in my back had been worse than usual, and I remember finally drifting off sometime close to dawn. My body exhausted, but my mind still restless. So when the scream came, it didn't just wake me, it jolted me upright, in a way that sent a sharp, burning pain straight through my spine. "My watch is gone." Jenna's voice rang through the house, loud, panicked, but there was something about it that didn't sit right. It was too sharp, too deliberate, like every syllable had been practiced. I blinked, disoriented, my heart already racing as I tried to piece together what was happening. Before I could even push myself fully upright, my bedroom door flew open so hard it slammed against the wall with a crack that echoed through the room. Jenna stood there, her chest rising and falling dramatically, her eyes wide but not with fear, with accusation. "It was you, wasn't it?" she snapped, pointing directly at me as if she had been waiting to say those words. "What?" My voice came out hoarse, my mind still struggling to catch up. "What are you talking about?" "My watch," she said, stepping into the room. "It's gone, and you're the only one who's been in the house all week." The implication hit me instantly. "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "Jenna, I didn't take anything. I've barely even left this room." Of course you didn't, she cut in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Because it just magically disappeared, right? Behind her, my mother appeared, her expression already hardened into something cold and final. That's enough, she said. We're going to settle this right now. There was no confusion in her voice, no hesitation, just certainty. And that was the moment something inside me started to twist. Because she didn't sound like someone trying to figure out the truth. She sounded like someone confirming it. I didn't take it, I repeated, trying to steady my voice, even as unease crept deeper into my chest. You know I wouldn't. Then you won't mind if we check your room, she replied flatly. It wasn't a question. She didn't wait for my answer. She stepped inside, moving with a kind of purpose that made my stomach drop. Not searching randomly, not hesitating. She went straight to my bed. I felt my pulse spike. Wait, what are you doing? I asked, trying to push myself up, my body protesting with every movement. But she was already there. With one sharp motion, she yanked the blankets off me, ignoring the way I flinched as cold air hit my skin. Then she grabbed the edge of the mattress and lifted it up from the frame. And just like that, it was over. The watch sat there in plain sight, perfectly placed, impossible to miss. For a second, everything went silent. My mind refused to process what I was seeing, because it didn't make sense. It couldn't. My voice faltered. I didn't put that there. I can't even reach under there without help, you know that. Oh my God, Jenna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in a performance so exaggerated it made my chest tighten. I knew it. I knew it was you. She stepped closer, her expression twisting into something almost gleeful. You were desperate, weren't you? She said, her voice rising. You needed money for your pills, so you decided to steal from your own family? That's not true, I said, my voice shaking now, not just from fear, but from the growing realization that none of this was happening by accident. You're lying. This is set up. You put that there. The words hung in the air. But they changed nothing. Because no one was listening. My father appeared in the doorway then, his presence filling the room with a heavy silence. He didn't ask what was going on. He didn't ask me to explain. He looked at the watch, then at me. And something in his expression hardened. That's enough, he said. 2 words. Final. Cold. Decisive. No, Dad, please, I said quickly, panic rising in my chest. You have to believe me. I didn't do this. I can barely walk. How would I even— I'm not interested in excuses, he interrupted, his tone sharp. Excuses. That's what my words had become. Not explanations. Not truth. Just excuses. He stepped into the room and walked straight to my nightstand. My phone lay there, charging beside a glass of water. My keys were next to it. Without a word, he picked them up. My chest tightened. What are you doing? I asked. Taking responsibility, he replied. You think you can steal from us and still enjoy the comforts we provide? The irony of that statement hit me like a punch, but there was no time to process it. Because everything moved too fast after that. Jenna grabbed a stack of black trash bags from the hallway closet. My mother went straight to my dresser, yanking drawers open and dumping their contents without care. Clothes, personal items, things I had spent years working for were shoved into bags like they meant nothing. Stop, please, stop! I cried, trying to push myself up, but the pain in my back flared instantly, forcing me back down. You're making a mistake. Just listen to me. No, my mother said sharply, not even looking at me. We've listened enough. That was the moment it hit me fully. This wasn't about the watch. It never was. This was something they had already decided. Something they had been building toward. The watch was just the excuse. I tried again, desperation clawing its way into my voice. You know me. You know I wouldn't do something like this. After everything I've done for this family, Jenna let out a short, mocking laugh. Exactly, she said. You've done enough. Now you're just taking. The words landed harder than anything else. Because they weren't angry. They were honest. At least, honest in the way she saw things. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a loss. A bad investment. And they were done carrying me. My father moved toward me then, his grip firm as he grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. Pain shot through my back, sharp and immediate, stealing the air from my lungs. "Wait, please, I can't," I gasped, but he didn't stop. He dragged me toward the front door, ignoring my protests, ignoring the way my body struggled to keep up. And then, cold, the door opened, and before I could steady myself, I was shoved forward. My bare feet hit the frozen concrete of the driveway, the shock of it sending a jolt through my entire body. I stumbled, barely catching myself before I fell. Behind me, the first bag landed with a heavy thud. Then another, and another, each one thrown with the same careless force, as if they were throwing out trash, as if I was part of it. "Don't come back," my father said from the doorway, his voice devoid of anything even remotely human. I turned, my vision blurring, my chest tight with something I couldn't even name anymore. "Please," I whispered, looking from him to my mother, to Jenna. "You're making a mistake. I didn't do this." For a moment, I hoped that something might shift, that someone might hesitate. But Jenna just crossed her arms, her expression smug. My mother stood behind the glass, watching, and my father, he slammed the door. The sound echoed through the cold air like a final verdict. Then came the click of the lock. I stood there, shaking, the cold seeping into my bones, my breath coming out in uneven bursts. Around me, the bags of my life lay scattered across the driveway. Everything I had worked for, everything I had given, reduced to this. I sank down slowly onto the icy ground, my body trembling uncontrollably now, not just from the temperature but from the weight of what had just happened. Because deep down, I knew, this wasn't the worst part. This was just the beginning of something much worse. If that night was the moment my life shattered, then what came after was the moment I finally understood just how deep the betrayal went. I don't remember how long I sat there on that frozen driveway. Time felt strange, stretched thin between pain and disbelief. My hands were numb, my body shaking uncontrollably, and for a while, I honestly thought that might be it, that this was how everything ended. Not with a dramatic confrontation or some final goodbye, but quietly, alone, in the cold. Then headlights cut through the darkness. Heidi's car. She had been planning to stop by that morning to check on me, something small, something ordinary. But the second she turned onto the street and saw me sitting there among black trash bags, something in her changed instantly. The car barely came to a full stop before she threw the door open and ran toward me. "Meredith, oh my God, what happened?" Her voice was sharp, urgent, but I could hear it trembling underneath. I tried to answer, but my teeth were chattering so hard the words wouldn't come out properly. All I could do was shake my head as she helped me to my feet, wrapping her coat tightly around my shoulders. They said I stole something," I managed, my voice breaking. "They threw me out." Heidi froze for a second, her eyes flicking to the house, then back to me. The disbelief on her face shifted quickly into something else. Anger. A dangerous, controlled kind of anger that made her jaw tighten. "Get in the car," she said firmly. "Now." She didn't wait for me to argue. She helped me into the passenger seat, turned the heater on full blast, and started loading my bags into the trunk with quick, efficient movements. Every slam of the trunk felt like punctuation to what had just happened. We didn't go back to that house, not even for a second look. Instead, we drove. Out of the neighborhood, out of the city, onto the highway, where the cold air slowly gave way to something quieter, something distant. I leaned back in the seat, exhaustion crashing over me in waves, my body finally starting to give in after holding on for too long. "Where are we going?" I asked weakly. "My Aunt Sarah's place," Heidi replied. "She lives across the state line. It's quiet, and she'll help. You need somewhere safe." Safe. The word felt unfamiliar. But for the first time that day, I let myself believe it. The drive blurred into a haze of passing lights and half-formed thoughts. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember was waking up to warmth. Real warmth. Not the harsh, dry heat of a car heater, but something softer, steadier. A home. Aunt Sarah's house. She opened the door before we even knocked, as if she had been waiting. The moment she saw me pale, shaking, barely able to stand, her expression shifted from concern to something deeper, something protective. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, pulling me gently inside. And just like that, everything I had been holding in broke. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of stillness. Aunt Sarah's house was nothing like the one I had left behind. It was quiet, calm, filled with small, thoughtful gestures that I had almost forgotten existed. Warm meals, clean sheets, soft voices, no tension hanging in the air. She took care of me without making me feel like a burden. That alone felt unreal. Slowly, my body began to recover, not fully, not yet, but enough that I could think clearly again. Enough that the shock started to fade, and the questions began to surface. Because something about what had happened didn't sit right. The accusation, the watch, the way everything unfolded so quickly. It felt planned. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it either. One evening, sitting across from Aunt Sarah at her kitchen table, I told her everything. From the years of supporting my family, to the accident, to the moment I was thrown out. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped tightly around her teacup, her expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. Then, she set her cup down with a sharp clink. "There's something you need to know," she said. The tone of her voice made my stomach tighten instantly. She took a slow breath, as if choosing her words carefully. "Your grandfather. He didn't trust your father with money," she began. "Not completely. He always worried about his decisions, about the way he handled things." I frowned slightly, confused. "What does that have to do with—" "He set up a trust fund," she continued. "For you, only you." The words didn't register at first. What?" "A trust fund," she repeated gently. "Before he passed, he arranged for a significant amount of money to be set aside in your name. It was meant to protect you, to make sure you'd always have something, no matter what happened." My heart started to race. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated. $750,000. The number hit me like a shockwave. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That kind of money. It wasn't just help. It was freedom. It was everything I had been struggling for, everything I thought I had lost. It meant I could afford the surgery I needed, the recovery, a fresh start. It meant I didn't have to go back. A fragile sense of hope began to rise inside me for the first time in months. "Can we access it?" I asked, my voice trembling now for a completely different reason. Aunt Sarah nodded. "We'll call the bank tomorrow." That night, I barely slept. Not from pain this time, but from anticipation. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't look like something to survive. It looked like something I could rebuild. The next morning, we made the call. I sat at the table, the phone pressed tightly to my ear, my heart pounding with every second that passed. I gave my name, my information, everything they needed. There was a pause on the other end. Then another. Something about the silence felt wrong. "I'm sorry," the representative said finally, her voice uncertain. "Can you hold for just a moment?" My grip on the phone tightened. Aunt Sarah looked at me, her brows knitting together in concern. When the line came back, the tone had changed. More careful, more serious. "Ma'am," the woman said, "I'm seeing that the account balance is currently zero." The words didn't make sense. I'm sorry, what?" I asked, my voice hollow. "The full amount was withdrawn," she continued, "several days ago, via cashier's check." The room seemed to tilt. "That's not possible," I said, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. "I didn't authorize anything. I haven't even—" "The transaction was processed with a signed authorization," she added. "Signed." My chest tightened. "Can you tell me the date?" I asked slowly. There was a brief pause as she checked. 3 days after the withdrawal request was submitted. 3 days. My mind raced, trying to line everything up. 3 days after. After I was thrown out. After my phone was taken. After I had no way of knowing. The realization hit me all at once, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't a coincidence. It was timing. Perfect timing. They hadn't just set me up. They had isolated me, removed me, and then taken everything. I felt the blood drain from my face as the truth settled in. They knew, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. They knew about the money. Aunt Sarah's expression hardened instantly. "We're calling a lawyer," she said. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The confusion, the hurt, the disbelief. It didn't disappear. But underneath it, something colder took its place. Something steadier. Because this wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was theft. This was planning. This was a line they had crossed so completely, there was no going back. And for the first time since that night on the driveway, I wasn't thinking about how to survive. I was thinking about how to fight back. The moment I decided to fight back was the moment something inside me stopped breaking and started hardening. Up until then, everything had been happening to me. The accident, the cold silence, the accusation, the night I was thrown out, the discovery that they had taken everything my grandfather left for me. I had been reacting, surviving, trying to make sense of it all. But now I understood something clearly. They hadn't just hurt me. They had planned this. And if they could plan something like that, then I could plan something too. Mr. Vance arrived that same afternoon. Aunt Sarah called him. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that immediately made the room feel more stable, more grounded. He listened carefully as we explained everything: the accident, the accusation, the eviction, the trust fund. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush us, just took notes, occasionally asking precise questions that cut straight to the heart of things. When we finished, he leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "This isn't just a family dispute," he said calmly. "This is fraud, potentially multiple counts. Forgery, financial exploitation, possibly conspiracy." Hearing it framed like that legally, clinically, made it feel even more real. "They forged my signature," I said quietly. He nodded. "And they timed the withdrawal to ensure you wouldn't be able to contest it immediately. No phone, no access to notifications. You were isolated." The word lingered. Isolated. That's exactly what they had done. He turned his laptop toward us a short while later, after making several calls to the bank's fraud department. The scanned image of the cashier's check sat on the screen, stark and undeniable. My name, my signature, or something that looked like it. But as I stared at it, I could see the differences. Small things. The way the M curved. The missing loop I had always added without thinking. It wasn't mine. It never had been. "They were careful," Mr. Vance said, "but not careful enough." My stomach turned as the full weight of it settled in. "They planned this," I whispered. He gave a small nod. "Yes. And that's exactly what we're going to prove." Over the next few days, Aunt Sarah's living room transformed into something else entirely. Papers covered the table, bank records, transaction logs, copies of documents I didn't even know existed. Every detail painted a clearer picture. The money had been transferred directly into a joint account under my parents' names. From there, it spread quickly. Debts paid off. Large withdrawals. Purchases that made my chest tighten just looking at them. And then, the final piece, an $80,000 transaction to a luxury car dealership, dated the day before. Heidi pulled up Jenna's social media, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. There it was. A picture of her standing next to a bright red sports car, smiling like she had just won something. Caption: "Hard work finally pays off." I stared at the image, something cold settling deep in my chest. Hard work. The irony was almost unbearable. "That's our leverage," Mr. Vance said quietly. "But we need something more than paper, something undeniable." I looked up at him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated for just a second before answering. "We need them to say it." The room went still. "To admit it," he continued, in their own words, "that they knew about the trust, that they orchestrated the eviction, that the watch incident was fabricated." My heart started to race. "You want me to go back there?" I asked. "Yes." The word landed heavily. Every instinct in my body rejected the idea immediately. The thought of stepping back into that house, of facing them again, it made my stomach twist. They could hurt me again, I said quietly. They won't, he replied firmly. Not with us nearby. We'll be positioned close. You won't be alone. Aunt Sarah reached for my hand, her grip steady. You can do this, she said softly. I wanted to believe her. But fear isn't something that disappears just because you decide to be brave. It stays. It lingers. You just learn to move with it. We spent hours preparing. A small recording device was carefully sewn into the lining of my jacket, hidden well enough that no one would notice it. Mr. Vance coached me on what to say it, how to sound desperate enough to lower their guard. Appeal to their ego, he said. Make them feel superior. People like that, they talk when they feel safe. So I practiced, again and again, softening my voice, letting it shake, letting the desperation feel real because part of it was, by the time the day came, I was exhausted, but ready. Or at least, ready enough. We parked a short distance from the house. I sat there for a moment, staring at the familiar street, the house that had once felt like everything. Now it just felt empty. You don't have to do this, Heidi said quietly from the driver's seat. I shook my head. Yes, though. Because this wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the truth. I stepped out of the car slowly, adjusting my crutches, letting my posture slump slightly. Every step toward the front door felt heavier than the last, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I knocked. The sound echoed in the silence. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened. My father stood there, his expression shifting almost immediately as he took me in. Disheveled, pale, smaller. For a split second, something like satisfaction flickered across his face. Back already? He said. I lowered my gaze. I didn't have anywhere else to go, I said, letting my voice tremble. He stepped aside. Come in. The house felt exactly the same, and completely different. My mother sat in her usual chair. Jenna sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. They both looked up as I entered, their expressions changing from casual to amused, like they had been expecting this. I just need help, I said softly. I ran out of money. I can't afford my surgery. My mother let out a quiet, dismissive laugh. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started stealing, she said. I swallowed hard. I know about the trust, I added, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandpa left it for me. That got their attention. A flicker of something sharp passed through my mother's eyes. Oh, she said slowly. That. She leaned back slightly, her expression almost bored. That was family money anyway. We just used it properly. The words landed exactly the way Mr. Vance said they would. Confident, careless, admitting more than she realized. Jenna stood up then, walking toward me with a small smile. You really didn't figure it out? She said, leaning in slightly. The watch? That was just to get you out. My pulse spiked. There it was, out in the open. Everything. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence stretch. Then something inside me shifted. I straightened. Slowly, deliberately. The weakness left my posture. The hesitation left my voice. And when I spoke again, it was different. Thank you, I said calmly. They frowned, confused. For what? My father asked. I reached into my coat and pulled out the small device, holding it up just enough for them to see the blinking red light. For saying it out loud. The color drained from their faces almost instantly. Before they could react, the front door opened behind me. Mr. Vance stepped inside, his presence cutting through the room like a blade. He placed a thick stack of documents on the table. You'll be hearing from us, he said evenly. And just like that, the power shifted. Completely. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Because for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't the one being cornered anymore. They were. If there's one thing this story reveals, it's how betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It often comes from the people we trusted the most. What makes this journey so powerful isn't just the pain Meredith endured, but the moment she chose to stop being a victim and started taking back control of her life. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about truth, dignity, and refusing to be erased. Sometimes, The hardest lesson we learn is that love should never feel like a transaction. And when it does, walking away isn't weakness, it's survival. Meredith didn't just lose a family, she uncovered who they truly were. And in doing so, she found something far more valuable herself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt used, betrayed, or underestimated, then you already understand why stories like this matter. Thank you for staying until the end and sharing this journey. For more powerful, emotional stories about justice, resilience, and rising from the darkest moments, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Tale Network. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life.